Senzo Meyiwa's longtime friend and a state witness, Mthokozisi Thwala, will return to the witness stand for a second day this morning to continue with his testimony in the High Court sitting in Pretoria. Thwala was among those present when Meyiwa was shot at the paternal Vosloorus home of his girlfriend, singer Kelly Khumalo, in October 2014. 5 men are standing trial for the murder. SABC News reporter Chriselda Lewis is now joining us live from the court. Chriselda, good morning. Thank you so much for making time for us. Were there any glaring changes, perhaps, in the testimony that was given by Mthokozisi Thwala as compared to the first time that he took the stand when this trial kicked off in the first round?
Well, Aldrin, it's very difficult to make reference to what happened previously, because you must recall that when this new trial started, basically the judge had said that whatever happened in the previous trial is basically null and void, which means that it simply did not happen. Hence, we've not been making reference in any of what we heard in the previous trial to what we're hearing now. Indeed, it is the second time that Mthokozisi Thwala is taking to the stand, but hypothetically, it is the first time, given that the trial itself has started afresh and that no reference or whatever was heard previously in the trial is considered null and void or simply basically did not happen. But Mthokozisi Thwala, Aldrin, from what we heard yesterday, detailing how he found his longtime friend Senzo Meyiwa lying on the floor. This was after he had been shot. He detailed how 2 alleged intruders had come into the house while they were sitting in the sitting room area. He says the first intruder that came in was carrying a gun and had basically demanded cell phones as well as money. He also detailed the second alleged intruder who entered, saying that he was carrying a sharp object which basically looked like a knife. He detailed how Longwe Thwala, he says, was one of the first occupants inside the house to run out after pushing the first intruder aside and managed to get outside the house. He says at some point he was also able to run out. One of the intruders, he says, chased him. He managed to get into the yard of the next door neighbors. You'd remember the Ngaches, Kaya Ngache, you'd recall, has previously testified in this particular matter. And now, he also says when he jumped back after hearing some screams coming from the home of Kelly Khumalo, when he went inside, he says that's where he saw Senzo Meyiwa lying on the floor and realized that he had been shot. He also detailed, how Meyiwa had been gasping, he says, while he was still lying on the floor, and as they tried to take him out of the house and load him into Meyiwa's X6, he says en route to the hospital, he was holding Meyiwa's hand, and even though Meyiwa was not able to respond as they were trying to speak to him, he could tell that Meyiwa was still gasping for air. And then he says when they arrived at the hospital, he stayed inside the car with his friend, and then at some point a stretcher had arrived, and then Khumalo, who is Kelly Khumalo and Zandi Khumalo's mother, had gone inside the surgery room where it seemed that they were trying to resuscitate Senzo Meyiwa, and that's where he says he was told that Senzo Meyiwa is no more. What we also heard there, Aldrin, is that seemingly on the version of Thwala's testimony is that he says that the news was broken to Meyiwa's wife, Mandisa, by Kelly Khumalo. He says that they jumped into the vehicle on their way to go and buy airtime, I guess at a nearby garage, and when he was calling Mandisa to try and explain to her what had taken place, he was unable to speak. He was beside himself, and he says that Kelly Khumalo had basically grabbed the phone from him and broken the news to Mandisa, who is Senzo Meyiwa's wife, that Senzo Meyiwa had been shot. So on his version, he says then it was Kelly Khumalo who had broken the news to Mandisa that Senzo Meyiwa had been shot. So some of the aspects that we're picking up here, Aldrin, is that you would recall that one of the witnesses, Tabisenga Mukiti, who was one of the neighbors that previously testified in this new trial, had detailed, about where she had basically seen Senzo Meyiwa where his body had basically been. Kaya Ngache had also said he had seen Meyiwa lying towards the passage area, but from what we see to where Thwala pointed out yesterday in terms of where Meyiwa was lying, Nthabiseng Mokete basically saying somewhere towards the middle area, but you're also hearing now from Mthokozisi Thwala that he had been lying somewhere between the couches and the TV. In the living room area. So we're expecting the defense, when they begin their cross-examination, to point to some of the testimony that we've heard in comparison to what we're hearing from Thwala at the moment. Aldrin Thwala also telling us yesterday that he was, allegedly assaulted by police for about 6 hours, he says. He says he had been beaten with open fists and, forced to lie on the ground. He says there's something like a tube that was taken out of a bag together with a rope. And he says, at some point, he'd even urinated on himself as a result of the alleged assault that he says he suffered at the hands of police. So what we're also expecting in cross-examination, very likely, is for the defense to ask whether he had opened a case against the police pertaining to this alleged assault that he's telling this court about. But he continues with his testimony this morning, and we're expecting to hear more details about what transpired after Meyiwa had been taken to the hospital, after the news was broken that Senzo Meyiwa was no more. Because you must recall, while Thwala says that it was Khumalo, after the nurses or hospital staff had come out and asked for an elder to go inside this room where Meyiwa was placed, basically Thwala says that the news was broken to Khumalo and himself while they were there about the death of Senzo Meyiwa. But we heard from Nthabiseng Mokete, who is the neighbor of the Khumalos, where she said that the news was first broken to her about Senzo Meyiwa having passed on. So Khumalo then having arrived after that. So we're picking up some of the dissimilarities in some of these testimonies, and it's something that is likely to be raised quite strongly once the defense tries to poke holes in the testimony of Mthokozisi Thwala. We start at 10 o'clock this morning. It is also going to be beamed on the SABC YouTube page once proceedings get underway here at the High Court in Pretoria this morning.
Chriselda, thank you so much. Just a quick one on what Mthokozisi Thwala testified on yesterday as well, is that he was brought to Gauteng under false pretense by the police, and you just referenced now the issue around him being tortured. Do we know whether confession was eventually made, though?
Well, he says, Aldrin, that he feels that he was being beaten up. You would recall, Aldrin, there are two dockets in this particular case. The other docket is a docket 375. Now, that is the docket that the National Prosecuting Authority, or the National Director of Public Prosecutions, is yet to decide on after the completion of this particular trial, and the docket with which this particular trial is going ahead, which now implicates the alleged involvement of these 5 men who are currently on trial for their alleged involvement in the killing of Senzo Meyiwa. Now, docket 375 is the docket that places those that were inside the house at the center of what had transpired on that day in October of 2014. So what Mthokozisi Thwala says is that indeed he was brought to Gauteng, and this is where he was allegedly tortured or assaulted, and he says he believed that he was being forced by, he mentioned quite a number of police officers, but the investigating officer in this docket 375, there are names that have come up there, including Joyce Buthelezi. So he says this Joyce Buthelezi is the one at the center of what had happened to him when that alleged torture or assault had taken place. But he says he was forced into, he believed he was being forced into saying something of his involvement in this matter, which is not true. He says he did not comply with a statement when he says he was told, well then, he would need to depose a statement saying that he was not inside the house when Senzo Meyiwa was killed, and he was asked inside this court whether he complied with that. He said he would have never done that. He was not going to depose to something that was not the truth, because in fact he was inside the house when this incident had taken place. So we're expecting a lot of that to come through once cross-examination begins, Aldrin, where the defense would try to poke holes in what I already said was, if this torture had taken place, why did he not open a case? Or perhaps we'll hear later on today whether he did or whether he did not. That has not come through at this particular point, but we're expecting the defense to ask why it was not done, if it was not done, if he believes he was tortured, or if this torture had happened so severely over 6 hours, he says, and there was this bag that was brought into this room where a mat was put onto the floor, that he had even urinated on himself. And he says that after he had been taken home, his family members, had taken pictures of these marks that were found on his body as a result of this alleged assault or torture that had taken place. I don't know if those pictures will be beamed inside court, but I guess today and the next days, in terms of cross-examination, is going to be very interesting to watch in terms of what Mthokozisi Thwala did. For example, you would recall that he did not go back to the crime scene on the same day that this incident had taken place. He says he had gone home. So they would ask, why would you leave then without speaking to police? Why did you only go to the Vosloorus police station the next day? And this is after going to the home of Kelly Khumalo where this incident had taken place. You would recall also what is quite crucial here, Aldrin, is that what we also heard Thwala say was that after he had left the hospital and had basically gone home, the next morning he had received a telephone call from longtime, who was one of the Meyiwa, who is one of the Meyiwa family members. They were asking for Senzo Meyiwa's ID, and because they said they wanted to begin with preparations for the funeral. He says that the last he remembered was that Senzo Meyiwa's ID was at one of his teammates, and not at the Khumalo home or with anyone else. But he says after he had gone to the Khumalo home the following day, when he got there, he found that Kelly Khumalo was not there, the mother was there, but subsequently he had asked Kelly Khumalo, I think this was in Mountbatten, after he had gone there, when he was told that Kelly Khumalo and the others were in Mountbatten. This is the home that Senzo Meyiwa and Kelly Khumalo had shared. When he asked about the ID, he asked Kelly Khumalo about Senzo Meyiwa's ID. She said she had it. And then just as he was saying that Kelly Khumalo did not want to give him the ID, the state basically, rose and said that that was not necessary, but it already conveyed that according to his version, Kelly Khumalo did not want to give him the ID. Now, this is quite important because remember, we've also heard testimony from the cell phone data analysts who say that a SIM swap was done on Senzo Meyiwa's phone a day after he had been killed. So how that is going to filter into all of this, remember, to do a SIM swap or to RICO your phone, you would need documents. One of those is an ID document. I'm not drawing any inference on that at this particular stage. Let's see what comes out of court.